The Western Conference is just getting more heated by the day, man, as the Utah Jazz have just been on a roll. Now, they did lose last night to the Rockets. No shame in that, I guess. And they actually gave Houston a pretty decent fight and made them look uncomfortable in the first half and made them go to a lot of their second and third options offensively, but eventually the Rockets figured it out. I actually went to bed at halftime, so I don't know how the game ended, but still, they put on a decent enough performance. And they're 8-2 in their last 10 games, and of course they went on that pretty good winning streak of 11 games right before the All-Star break. So what's going on with the Jazz? Can they be scary in the Western Conference playoffs if they manage to at least get past the 7th seed? Can they keep this up? Are they going to drop off? Well, let's talk about it. I mean, a big thing is that Rudy Gobert is just finally healthy. And when Gobert's healthy, of course, he is a defensive monster who also does a lot of good things on offense as well in terms of finishing and going to the free throw line a decent amount and getting offensive rebounds, and he's one of the best rollers to the rim in the NBA. And I mean, he's extremely effective at the center position, and he's finally able to move around effectively. And the next thing is Derek Favors' defense has also been pretty okay as well. He, before injuries, was one of the better defensive fives in the league, who can move around pretty well on the perimeter, switch occasionally, and for a while this season he was looking kind of slow. Last year he was definitely slow because he was recovering from an injury. I mean, as he put it, that he was playing on basically one leg last year, and it seems like he's starting to get better this year. And they've had those two starting together for, well, whenever they've both been able to play. And the spacing has been pretty rough for the most part with them, but I do think Quinn Snyder has been able to do enough to get those two to play together and have it be effective. Pretty much wherever one dude is standing, the other guy is on the other side of the floor. And if Gobert is in a screen, then Favors will be on the baseline away from the Gobert screen. And then you can just flip that around for when Favors is involved in a pick and roll as well, whether it be with Rubio or Donovan Mitchell or occasionally Joe Ingles or maybe even Alec Burks sometimes. And it seems to do just enough in terms of spacing. And then, of course, they both spend a lot of minutes not playing with each other at all, and that's when you start to see like your Rebko at power forward or Jay Crowder at power forward. He's only been playing 6 games for them, but they just kind of figure it out with those two enough. Now, in terms of the last, well, not the last 13 games, but throughout that big winning streak and then the last couple as well, they've been making a lot of three-pointers. I mean, Joe Ingles has been shooting like 50% from 3 in that stretch. Ricky Rubio's even been shooting well from 3. Not as many attempts as Ingles, of course, but they're still going in. Donovan Mitchell's been out of his mind from 3, shooting like 40% on, I believe it's like 6 or 7 attempts a game. For the season, he's at 35%. And Mitchell's are a little bit more crazy just because they're not all just like spot shots, catch and shoots wide open. A lot of his are pull-ups or they're contested, and he shows a lot of comfort in his three-point game. And I mean, Mitchell, his offense has been huge for them. I mean, it's a big reason why they've had this revitalization, because he's the only dude who can really put up points like that. Everybody else on this team pretty much needs someone else to create for them, and he's good, no doubt. Joe Ingles also has a little bit of creating his own shot. He's very subtle with it, but Ingles does have some skills in the pick and roll, and occasionally he can bail them out of a play that goes nowhere. It's not something that you ask him to do frequently, but, you know, the 1 or 2 odd possessions a game where he finds himself with like 5 seconds left and nothing to do, it's not always a guarantee that nothing is going to happen out of it. We should also talk about Jay Crowder. His defense has been actually good for them. He's been moving around the floor well, and it seems like him being engaged on offense and being on a team that has a real system based on movement and passing the ball around and the locker room liking each other, it seems to have motivated him a lot more on defense. Now, offensively, he's still having a rough time. The threes are not going in. I know he made at least like 2 last night against the Rockets. And the one good thing I think with Crowder is, number one, he's a good free throw shooter. And then 2 is he's always quick to shoot the 3. And I think that says that should be a good shooter over a long stretch. And we've just seen maybe an outlier for him with his 3-point shooting this season. Of course, didn't come into the season in the best of shape and all that. So we'd like to think that he can still be a good outside shooter. But what he has been doing with the Jazz is he's still making teams pay for leaving him wide open because he's been pretty okay on closeouts. He's been able to get by the defender and then either make the extra pass or even finish around the basket. He even had an isolation type play last night against Houston. I think it was against James Harden actually, where he actually just took him off the dribble and he was able to score at the basket, and that's a good sign for Crowder. I mean, any ways that he can get offense besides just being wide open on cuts or in transition, that's a good sign. And it's just enough. You know, you put all this together, you put Rubio making some threes, which I don't think is going to hold up. You put Ingles being unable to miss, and then Favors and Gobert spacing being just good enough on top of what Donovan Mitchell is going to do for you. And, well, there you go. Then you combine that with what this team can do on defense, and boom. Now, can they maintain this? I mean, like I just said, I don't think Rubio is going to be making his threes because, well, he's pretty much never made his threes for any consistent stretch. Weirdest thing with Rubio is he's always been a very good free throw shooter, but he can't shoot from the floor, which always confused me, but, you know, what are you going to do? I do fear that Favors and Gobert could eventually get ugly again, because there were stretches of this season where Quinn Snyder was playing them like barely any minutes together. I think defenses will still pack the paint whenever Gobert is rolling to the rim. I think if you time it just right, because Favors and Gobert have gotten pretty good at dumping the ball off to the other guy who's chilling on the baseline, but if you time it just right, you could get yourself to being able to like defend the roll man, but then still be able to come out and defend the big on the baseline. It's tough to do, and not every big center can do it, but, you know, the Joel Embiids, the Anthony Davises of the world, I mean, you know, not everybody's going to be able to defend that, but I do think it's fearful nonetheless that those two might not be able to just play together all the time. Anyway, let's just look at where they are in the standings. So they're number 10 right now. They are 2.5 games out of the Nuggets, who are the 8th seed. Of course, 3 through 10. Well, not really 3 through 10. We'll say 5 through 10 is decided by 3.5 games at the moment. So 1 or 2 games losing, and suddenly you're in a drastically different position in the West. I mean, the thing with Utah is if they can get to number 6, because if they get 8 or 7, then they're going to lose in round 1 to the Rockets or the Warriors. But if they got to number 6, you know, they'd currently be playing the T-Wolves. Now, I would still pick Minnesota just because Jimmy Butler would be the best player in that series. But I think the Jazz could definitely contend with the T-Wolves pretty well. And if you're getting Jimmy Butler not healthy, or if you're just not getting him at all because his injury may have been worse than we expected, then I think Utah would probably win that series. You know, and then you look at, let's say if the Spurs manage to climb back to number 3. I mean, if Kawhi's there, then they're the 3rd best team in the West, and that's just what it is. But if he isn't, then I think Utah beating the Spurs, I think that's a realistic thing. And I think the one thing with the Jazz is they're that team who can just make the game really ugly. They can slow it down. They have one of the slowest paces in the league to accommodate Gobert. They're 26th in the league in pace. And if you just slow the game down, you control the boards, and you have some hot 3-point shooting, I mean, that doesn't mean that you're going to beat a team that you should lose to, at least most of the time. But you can at least stretch a series out an extra game or two just from all that stuff. Now, going back to if they can even be in a playoff series, they do have to deal with Denver, who is maybe the best home team in the NBA. Well, maybe not number 1, but they're definitely like top 5 or 6. And they still have like 10 home games left. They could go like 8-2 in those games or 9-1 in those games. And that could be tough for them. There is also OKC, who's still struggling with Robertson being gone, as their defense has just been flat out worse without the guy. Anthony Davis is just Michael Jordan at the moment, and the Pelicans have won 6 in a row, so maybe they're just going to hop on the back of AD and he's going to lead them to like the 5th seed at the center position, where, I mean, when he's been at the center spot and the guys around him have at least just been not bad, the Pelicans have typically been a pretty okay team, even if he really can't handle that physically over an entire season, as we've seen with his injuries. So there's a fear that he's going to get hurt down the stretch for them, especially with his usage right now. And then there's the Blazers, who I can never figure out whatsoever. So I think if I had to make a decision, and typically when I do that, it means I'm going to be wrong, as it's looking like I might be wrong about Miami, because it seems like Dwayne Wade is hijacking their offense and taking shots that he shouldn't be taking. But if I had to make an opinion on this, I think Utah is probably not going to make it. If I can be honest here, I think, if anything, Russell Westbrook just goes nuts down the stretch. The Nuggets are really good at home, and the Pelicans and Blazers just kind of hold on because they're okay enough teams that already have a like 3.5 game lead up on Utah. That's what I'm going to guess, but I think the Jazz will definitely be exciting down the stretch, and they're building something pretty good, you know? If only Gordon Hayward had stayed, and then Donovan Mitchell would be where he is now. He wouldn't be putting up the same points, but he would still be the same quality of player. Who knows where they'd be? But yeah, I think next season, Utah, assuming no injuries and all that, they should be a problem, and they could still get in and cause a headache for one of the top 4 seeds. But we'll just have to see. It's definitely an uphill climb, but they've been doing stuff. Anyway, that's it.